New Mexico Field Station. We're still here. Carolina is part of our group here, and those who know Craig Allen, he was Washington who started the field station. And we study forest ecology, fire ecology, in part to inform the management that's going on here. So today, start off, why are we here? Why does the coalition exist? Fires are getting more severe, they're getting larger, they're affecting our cities, right? Unfortunately, killing people, targeting homes, and then threatening our forests, as well as ecosystem services, right? In Santa Fe, you're drinking water that comes from our forest. You recreate out here, forest products, and when these fires come through, if you've seen the HEMAs, a lot of times they're not coming back anymore. And so, as David Byrne at Talking Heads might say, well, how did we get here, right? How did we get here? This is why I wanted to come to this spot. This is the challenge. Look behind you. Imagine what a fire is going to do the next time it burns that. It ain't going to be pretty. And so, how do we know how we got to this place where these big severe fires come from? And what did fires used to look like? What did this forest used to look like back when we call them the good fires were burning? Well, of course, the answer to all of that is tree rings. Those who know me know that I use the rings of trees to answer all sorts of ecological and climate and fire questions. Let's see, Caroline, I'm going to pass out. Brought some show and tell here, just some local samples from the Santa Fe watershed and Santa Fe Fireshed. These were all tree ring fire scars, evidence of past fires that we use to understand the history. And the miracle of these things is that if we went traipsing around in there, I'm sure we could find a fire scarred stump in there. They record old fires, and look at some of the years on these. I was just working up a sample this morning. My favorite, this little tiny one from Little Tasuke. We drove right by the site. It's got fires in the 1500s. We've got fire scars that go back here in the 1300s, and every Ponderosa pine stand I've ever been in has tree ring fire scars. Fire was a ubiquitous part of those forests, and arguably we have an incredible record here at the Fireshed to inform the fire management. Let's see, if you flipped your hand out, let's start at page 2, this one here that has the map of the Fireshed area with all the colorful dots on it. Anybody seeing those? Those dots represent samples of tree ring fire scars. And so now in the Santa Fe Fireshed, we've got 36 plots. So those are all those dots. And to orient people, we're at the big X. See the big X there on the map? That's where we're standing. The dash, kind of the dotted outline, is the Santa Fe watershed itself. And so we've got samples all the way north to Rio Medio. We've got samples all the way in the Santa Fe watershed, and then south all the way to La Cueva. And every spot we've been throughout that area has record of past fire. And so that's what you're looking at. This network, 36 plots, we've got over 300 sampled tree and fire scarred trees dated. We've got over 1,400 individual tree ring fire scars dated. A lot of work by our colleagues, Carolina, other folks over decades. We've been working on this project. We have a ton of data. We have got tree ring records that go back into the 1300s, and so really long record of fire. And the ubiquitous story is fires didn't used to kill trees. Now they're killing everything and burning down the forest. And so a tree ring fire scar, these individual records you're seeing, they're the tree recording when a fire came and burned and scarred the tree just like we get a scar, and then the tree lived to tell about it. And you'll see on these, it happened all the time. It used to happen very frequently. We've got one tree that survived and recorded 18 fires over its life. And how many trees in the modern fires are surviving any, if not multiple? And so again, it just starts to paint this picture of like, there used to be fire all the time, and it was low severity, right? It was not killing the majority of the trees. And so this is very important for managers thinking about, again, well, how did we get here? Well, the Forest Service got really good at putting out all those fires. Prior to that, overgrazing got rid of all of the fine fuels, all the grass, and a lot of these fires actually stopped in the late 1800s, well before 1910 rule in Smokey Bear. And so kind of a little known fact is that the grazing actually put out fires. It also gives you a little bit of a clue about what those fires were. So if cows could have put out the fires, they weren't big raging infernos where you're dropping, DC-10 slurry drops on them. They were little surface fires burning through, and they were burning grass. And then the cows ate all the grass and couldn't burn it anymore. And so railroad arrived in Lamy, New Mexico in 1879. Last widespread fire in the Santa Fe Fireshed was 1880. Bunch of cows and sheep got off of that railroad, came out and ate everything, went back to markets, and so the grazing industry expanded incredibly circa 1880. And that date is pretty much similar across northern New Mexico, across the Southwest. And so now we're 145 years later, and this site last burned in 1880. 145 years worth of fuel buildup, 145 years of tree regeneration, and this is the problem that we hand over to our forest managers and everybody else and say, okay, this is what we need to deal with, but now we understand the problem, we understand how we got here and where we need to go back to. These forests were resilient, much more resilient when fire was burning through them historically. And so this kind of sets the table for some of the management. Back to this map here. So with tree and fire scars, we can do fire frequency. So you just count the number of years between the fires on the piece of wood, and that tells you how frequent the fire used to come. You can do severity. If it's leading a fire scar, it did not kill the tree. That's actually a great place. In some forests, as you go higher and wetter, fires will actually kill the trees. Quaking aspen, those big aspen stands, in Aspen Vista, that's from a higher severity fire. Up on the top of the mountain, fires used to burn hotter. In these areas, fires will burn cooler. We can get the season. So within the tree ring, we can tell where fires burn in the spring, midsummer, or the fall. And then the coolest thing, which is why I included these maps, is now we're able to figure out how big fires work. By networks, we can stitch them together. And so these two fires in 1685, 1748, just examples within the dry conifer zone of the Santa Fe Fireshed. These fires were burning almost every tree we sampled. In 1748, over 30% of sites in North America were burning. 30% of sites in North America were burning in 1748. We have the tree ring fire scars across this big network we're doing right now. So fire used to be really ubiquitous. Fires used to be very large, but much lower severity. And so this is the kind of the picture and part of the challenge and the scale of what we can try and get back to. Let's see. And if I'm getting close to time, I'm almost done here. You can give me a nod or a kick or whatever. So flip to the back here. There's on the top at A, there is what we call a fire chart. And so I dug through our data. The nearest site is we'll drive right by it. It's this Big Tasuki South plot number 4. It's just right around the corner, but a couple hundred yards away from that. And so these are the tree ring fire scars we sampled there. As you're looking at that, the horizontal lines are the records of individual trees. The timeline at the bottom, you'll notice, goes from about 1600 out to the present. And then all of those little vertical tick marks, those are the fire scars. Evidence fire burned through that area, didn't kill the tree, and the tree survived. You'll note last fire there was 1880. Everybody wants to know fire frequency, how often. I mean, we're at like 9,500 feet here, almost 3,000 meters. This is a pretty wet place. Mean fire interval was 14 years. Okay. That's pretty darn frequent. And so if you do the quick math, we owe this forest 10 fires over 145 years since it's burned, right? Should have burned 10 times. And that's why you get that, right? All these trees came in. We've been doing some monitoring lately. We've got over 6,000 individual trees tagged that we're remeasuring. We were out there doing it yesterday, Carolina and I and Ben. And from those data, we're estimating on current tree densities, we're like on average 700 trees per acre. I mean, right? This is probably thicker than that. Some are thicker, some are thinner. And historically, we can age the trees and figure out how many trees were here back in 1880 when the fires were burning. We're much lower. On average, probably 5 times as many trees now, upwards of 10 times as many trees. And so this is the problem. This is information about this problem that ultimately then we try and pass along to Ryan and other people at the Forest Service to figure out how to get back to some sort of resilience for our forest. This forest will burn again, and hopefully we can get it back to a state that it was surviving these fires in the past.
Some of you are new, and but I think it's important to showcase kind of like that no one's doing this alone. There's a lot of people kind of working together, and that's how this stuff happens and builds on itself, and things get leveraged. So my name's Eitan with the Forest Stewards Guild. And before I jump into that, I want to just give a thank you to like all our public servants here. Like, we have scientists, we have managers, we have like administrators and other specialists, and it's just not been the easiest year to be a federal employee. And so Ellis was just talking about collecting all this data, and that's awesome. And I was like, wow, like that's going to be so helpful to have the findings of that data, and that's all because of like, that we're working together, and the USGS has all this capacity in New Mexico. So just wanted to start with that. Okay, so the Greater Santa Fe Fireshed Coalition formed in 2016. There was interest between the State Forestry Division of New Mexico, the City of Santa Fe County, the Forest Service, Nature Conservancy of New Mexico, and the Forest Stewards Guild. There was kind of a meeting early in 2016, and people were saying, hey, the Santa Fe region needs more attention. There's more need here for the forest and watershed situation that's happening here. And but before that came the Santa Fe Municipal Watershed work that the City of Santa Fe, the Nature Conservancy, and the Forest Service embarked on at this point 25 years ago or so. And that is a huge success and deserves a lot of credit. The city gets roughly 40% of our water from the watershed, and it's our cleanest and cheapest. I'm like taking some of Alan's talking points, I feel bad. But, and the Forest Service has done a ton of, thinning followed by prescribed fire, and our watershed is in a much healthier situation because of that. Now it needs maintenance and a few other things, but it's 25 years ago it was in a much worse situation than now. So that's a huge success. And the Fireshed group was one of the impetuses for the group was that, hey, the watershed is an anchor point. We need to work north of it and south of it for both to protect the watershed and to do good work in other adjacent watersheds. Where we're standing, drains to the village of Tesuque, to the Pueblo of Tesuque, so everywhere is a watershed. Everywhere people are living downstream, all these watersheds need work. And if we can avoid kind of some of the catastrophes that we're seeing around the country and in New Mexico, then it's all going to be worth it. So that coalition formed. We have kind of a charter. We have some committees. We've been meeting regularly since 2016. And right away, there are some opportunities to support some categorical exclusion work on public land. That's like a planning category, and the coalition supported that. And then there was a bigger push for environmental assessment. The coalition supported that as well. So, the coalition is about doing things, about seeing change happen on the ground, and making things better both for kind of the watersheds and also communities. One other piece the coalition is doing is that the city, county, and the Forest Stewards Guild are working together lower down on the mountain right around homes, reducing hazardous fuels right around structures, and Maya is our specialist on that, and juggling a lot of things, getting a lot of good work done. So there's just a lot of activity happening, and I think it's kind of anchored in kind of the work that happened in the municipal watershed and that coming together that happened in 2016.
I'd just like to add a couple of big projects that I recall that was in the coalition, and it wasn't just the partners supporting things from the coalition, but partners actually putting money down, where we had the La Cueva projects, where we had state money on federal land going to that paid the city to send a crew out there to go do the work. And then for the environmental analysis, for this Santa Fe Mountains Landscape Resiliency Project, that was federal dollars coming to the city to spend for this EA, but also to spend a lot of money on the education and outreach portion to let people know what the coalition was doing, what this EA was doing, what the La Cueva project was doing. And a lot of that money went to the Guild to put on the ground. We got bus wraps and held a bunch of seminars and all kinds of other like roadshow things that we went out and told people, hey, this is the coalition, this is why fire is important to this landscape, and it's been missing for 140 years or whatever it is now.
Yeah, thanks, Porfirio. So one more thing I'll add before passing it to Ryan, who will tell us about the management specifics and the goals and tactics being used, is this. So the Fireshed Coalition also has a communications committee, and the communications committee is doing a lot of things, connecting with media outlets, working on a wildfire detection camera that some of us have been talking about this morning, but also very simple, low-tech things like this, which is trying to explain a lot in a short amount of time, short amount of space. And so there's a few of these around the landscape. I was riding my bike on this trail a few weeks ago, and I saw this, and I was like, oh my God, I had no idea this was here. And it's so cool that it's here, and I'm just happy. And there's QR codes, so this is a recreation area. So hopefully we're connecting with people, and instead of just doing the management, we're also being transparent and communicative about it, to try to bring the public and the community along with us. So with that, I'll pass it to Ryan.
Hi, I'm Ryan Ream. I'm the Assistant Fire Management Officer for Espanola Ranger District. Before that, I was the fuels planner here on the Santa Fe National Forest, and I moved back over to operations. This project is really important to me. I've been the project coordinator on the Santa Fe Mountain Lands when it was still in the NEPA planning phases. So I've been involved with this pretty heavily, and I'm a fire guy. I'm not a fire ecologist. I'm not an ecologist. Not a biologist. I'm a fire guy, and I came up under Dennis Carroll, who is a fire ecologist, and I worked with him for 5 years. And before that, I trudged around the woods in the Santa Fe watershed with Bill Armstrong. So I learned a lot of what I know about fire ecology from those guys. But what we have here, we have a fire problem here. This is going to burn. It's just a matter of when. And with that tussock moth on the heels of Hermit's Peak Calf Canyon, there's a lot of challenges with prescribed burning, and it's tough. And it's really getting harder and harder to find a good window to burn within. We're constrained by the prescription parameters that we put in our burn plans to burn this, because we don't want to have another Hermit's Peak Calf Canyon. That would shut down our burn program altogether. And you got the tussock moth, you got the political climate, and I'm just going to say this right now. If you see one of our meetings, our public meetings, please come. We need supporters. We got tore up hard last fall. There were people frothing at the mouth at us. So Alan was there, Ryan was there. So we need your support if you want this to happen. So I'm just going to make that plug right there. Getting down to the nuts and bolts here, you're sitting on a fuel break here. So the way I broke all this out is how I would break out a fire. Putting in, using an anchor point, and that anchor point was the Pacheco Canyon project that we've done a lot of work on, and the Santa Fe watershed. Working from those two projects, working to try to fill in the gaps in between in the Tesuque Creek. Oh, and then there's Hyde Park too. We got a lot of work done in Hyde Park. But the first thing that I wanted to do is the fuel breaks. Somewhere we can get a foothold in, much as we did in the Maydio fire, and I'll talk about that later. But we put in the fuel break, we pile it, we thin it, we pile the deaden down, as you see here. Burn these piles in the snow. We put the hand lines in. Once these piles are burned, hopefully this winter, we were going to try last winter, but we didn't get enough snow. Then we have containment lines. And then from there, interior in this unit, we thinned the interior of the unit. And once we get those piles done, then we're ready to do a broadcast burn. And we've got 4 units laid out within this Tasuke Creek that if it gets out of this unit, then we have the next unit we use as a contingency. And we'll fall back to that next unit if we can't catch it. And we're also working, we couldn't work into the spruce, which is a high intensity, low frequency burn ecosystem. And so we weren't working in the spruce fir, we're working down here in the mixed conifer, frequent fire, ponderosa pine, where we get most of our starts as a spot to anchor from. So that's where we're basically sitting, is that change above Hyde Park Road. So, you know, I'm not too worried. Normally when we do our prescribed burns in the fall, that spruce fir won't burn and the aspen won't burn. So this is a good spot to get a foothold in. And once we can get these units burned here, we've kind of got a buffer at the head of Tasuke Canyon. So that's the thought process with this. As far as getting down to the nuts and bolts, like we thinned out the fuel breaks and piled the dead down. This thinning here is just 9 inches and under across all conifers. We didn't cut any white pine. I didn't find that much of a threat. It's on the decline across the country. We didn't thin any aspen. And the reason that we did 9 inch and under, well, one is this was an inventoried roadless area and we couldn't thin anything above 9 inches. But the next problem is when you cut it, you got to do something with the material. And it's really hard to deal with larger than 9 inch diameter wood. It just won't burn up in the piles. And you leave that stuff on the ground, and then that's more fuel for you to lose the leaf trees that you left. And we found in other prescribed burn units that 9 inch and under is kind of the turning point. We take the ladder fuels, the fuels that will carry the fire from the ground up into the canopies of the remaining trees. And once you reintroduce fire and clear some of that ground fuel off the ground, then you start to see, and you'll see it in Pacheco Canyon where we've done some prescribed burning, that you start to get the reprod coming in. You start to get that understory and that multi-age forest. But the main thing we're dealing with here is dealing with the fire problem. Because we don't deal with the fire problem, it doesn't matter. Las Conchas, Hermit's Peak, there ain't no Mexican spotted owls, there ain't no pinyon jay, there isn't no Jemez Mountain salamanders, you know, and you're going to get that downstream flooding, and we get that in these areas. Pueblo Tasuke is in a bad situation. So yeah, I'm sure there's some time for some questions, and I'm sure there's some questions, and you know, on the maps up on my truck I can show you how all these units are laid out, but that's a rough down and dirty.
Thank you.
Questions?
Yeah.
On the inventory roadless area rule, do you have to get permission from the regional forester to actually be able to thin in an IRA, or can the forest supervisor do it? And you know, there's been a policy shift, you know,
Yeah.
at the White House recently too. Can you comment on those couple of things?
So in the NEPA process, when we were after all the comments were through, the EA went to the regional office, and that was one of the things that they commented on, was the inventory roadless area. They wanted to put the diameter cap of 9 inch and under, which was fine with me, because we don't have any way of getting any of that wood out. There's 102 roads, really the only major road that we have, and then Hyde Park Road are the only major roads that we have in here. And this is steep ground. Most of it's 40% and above, and there's no merchantable timber in here anyway. It'd cost more to pull this stuff out than it's worth. And it deals with the fire problem. But yeah, there has been a policy shift. I'm not too sure on what that is. I heard that that's going away. But it's still within our environmental assessment, and we'd have to we'd have to do a modification to that to be able to go over that 9-inch within this area. There are we can go over that diameter cap in Pacheco Canyon and Hyde Park. We've met our limit on the acres that we can thin in Hyde Park, and then we can go over that diameter in the Santa Fe watershed because that we had different stipulations in that NEPA. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
I'll also say that Ellis is here for questions too. So as you're looking at your handout and you're maybe wondering about some of the data displayed, like happy to kind of answer questions from anything so far and have a dialogue. Yeah, Steve.
I have a question for you, Ellis. Do we know when the big fire that created the Aspen stand happened?
1880.
What's that?
1880.
Okay.
Last fire. So it burned here, left fire scars.
That was
So
what you said. Okay.
yeah, I mean, it gets a little bit into the ecology of fire. As Ryan mentioned, this is kind of what we call dry conifer forests. You got Doug fir, you got pine, and those are the forests that usually have fire scars. You get up there, and as Ryan said, those things are usually like go, no-go systems. And when they go, then they burn everything, and then aspen regenerates, and they're evolved to that. And so, kind of the different fire ecology. But yeah, that big aspen stand you're looking up there, 1880. Some of that burned in 1860 as well, and so there were multiple high elevation fires. The last time the spruce fir burned in the Santa Fe watershed was 1685. Same big fire I'm showing you here. This was a fire that was burning massively, and it had the right conditions. And so basically those systems, they have a ton of fuel, they're really wet, you just need a mega drought, the right winds, and so every few hundred years those spruce fir will just go all the way to the top. I mean, this is the other challenge in these systems, is you've got some of those higher elevation zones as well.
Ellis, can I add on to that?
Yeah.
For the question of when the aspen burned, we have some professionals from our local publication here, the Santa Fe New Mexican, and maybe you don't know off the top of your head. I'm trying to see where they are, but I heard. So maybe this is more rumor at this point. I heard that in 1880 there was no coverage of this fire in the New Mexican. And you think about it now, if there's a single tree burning in this woods, it would be in the paper, right? So if you think about like the people who are, Santa Fe has been a city for hundreds of years by the time 1880 rolls around, and there was a fire that burned, I don't know, 15,000 acres, or I don't know how big that is. And it wasn't in the newspaper. It gives you an idea that people were kind of used to fire all around them on the landscape. And that's something that I feel like is interesting to point out. Like, we need to learn to live in a different way on these landscapes, and it's hard, and it's just really hard. But apparently in 1880 you could have a fire that blew up this whole drainage, and people were not talking about it.
I want to comment on that. Medio fire we had in 2020, and then 2011 we had the Pacheco fire. Those are the last two big fires we had in the Fireshed. I was on both of those. But there are a lot of fires that happen. A lot of single trees, 2 acres, little ones that don't make the paper. Pretty much every year in Pacheco Canyon or Hyde Park or the watershed, we have at least 1 or 2 starts. We did last summer. We didn't this summer. It was really wet, thank goodness. We're still actively suppressing all those fires. I would really like to see us. The politics here are really bad for managing fires, and they're going to be even worse now after the Laguna fire. And I can answer questions about the Laguna fire too if you want. But that's really where we're gonna make the biggest impact. This prescribed burning, it's good. And we've done some good things where like the Medio fire, we were able to stop that on a prescribed burn. But managed fires where we can actually get some acres done is where it's at. But we're just not there in the Santa Fe Fireshed yet to do that. But yeah, we get plenty of natural starts up here.
As far as managed fires, are you referring to like active fires that naturally may have started and then
Natural ignitions, lightning starts that we actively manage to put fire back on the landscape.
Awesome.
And when you say we're not there,
Fire for ecosystem benefit, I guess is the terminology they're using now.
when you say we're not there in the Santa Fe Fireshed, is that because of like thinning that still needs to happen, or is that more like political?
No, it's more political.
Creating that decision space so that fire managers, like, so Ryan's boss feels comfortable saying, oh, okay, we got a lightning start that's 10 acres and you want to make it 10,000 acres. Can we do that? And is a line officer willing to sign off? Is the forest supervisor willing to sign off? Is the region willing to sign off on doing that work, right? As that,
Yeah.
yeah. And so we're not there. We need to create that decision space so that those managers feel like we can do this effectively without having, I don't know if it's political repercussions, but just, public outcry that, hey, we're not doing what needs to get done out here.
Yeah, the place where they do in the southeast and Florida and those parts of the country in the south, they do thousands of acres of prescribed burning, and people encourage it, and they don't mind the smoke because it's just part of the culture that's been created there, and we need to work harder to do that. That this is a fire community. If we want to live here, we have to get used to smoke. Smoke's the biggest thing. People don't like it, but it's going to happen whether we do it or it happens on its own. And it's an imperfect art. When we do a managed fire, we can get resources from across the country. When we do a prescribed burn, it's really hard to get resources. So having that ability to have a team and get resources and do it is a lot safer than doing it on a shoestring organization on a prescribed burn. I'm just giving you the reality of it.
I want to throw in just a positive thing here. Props to the Fireshed and especially to the folks on the ground. If you'll flip to the back page here of your handout, there's a little graph at the bottom, if y'all can hear me. This is 400 years of area burned in the Santa Fe watershed. And so you see the blip at the end, right? The timeline goes back to 1600 out to 2000. 2024 actually. The blip at the end is all the work that's been done in the Santa Fe watershed, prescribed fire, which is an incredible success. We're writing up a paper right now highlighting this is a success across the West. Like, this is incredible. It's close to the state capitol, to all of the stuff we've been able to do this. I think we should take a lot of success for that. So then the question is, what I described, like, you just can't imagine how much darn fire there was on this landscape. Can we ever get back to that? Well, the answer is yes. So if you look at those black bars, those are individual area burned in any 1 year. And then that light line that kind of runs along, that's a 17-year total. And so the 17-year total, if you run that line back, we're well above average of what was burning with all the fire scars, which is, like, to me, shocking that we could get there. And y'all are out there sucking the smoke and doing the hard work, but we as a group have done it. And so I think we should pat ourselves on the back. And it gives you a little optimism, because when you look up at the landscape, I don't know, Ryan, sometimes if you do this, I look like, oh my God, there's a lot of work to be done. Can we get there? We can. And this shows that this place is going to be more resilient now. It's going to be more resistant to fire when it comes, and you can anchor off of it, and we can keep building off of that. So I just want to throw that positive in there, that again, the trees don't lie. They're showing you that we're back to where we were. You can't just get your hair cut and call it done, right? It'll keep growing, and so we got to do some more stuff in there eventually. But anyway, I just wanted to give the group, a pat on the back of success, especially y'all at the Forest Service. Thanks, guys.
I think that's probably a good place to end if folks are ready to move on to the next site. We can keep talking about this stuff.
If we have treatments within these areas, prescribed burn units, then if we have a major wildfire, those will be places where firefighters can get in there and anchor off of and contain a fire before it gets into the spruce and gets to the ski area.
Cool. One more question, and then probably have to keep going.
Yeah, go ahead.
Are y'all also doing treatments in the Pinon juniper? as a part of this, or mostly up here?
Pinyon juniper's tricky. It's pinyon juniper woodlands are an all or nothing as well. It needs wind to move it. Other than the wildland urban interface for protection for homes, the problem is you don't have the ground fuels in a pinyon juniper woodland. It needs wind to push it through the canopies of that PJ. Pinyon juniper grassland is different because it has the grass to carry the fire. And so there's two differences. Pinyon juniper woodland and pinyon juniper grassland are two different ecosystem types. One's frequent fire, low intensity, and the other one is low frequency, high intensity. So you start the same as with the spruce. You start thinning that pinyon juniper, and then you start getting the grass going in there, and you got to deal with the fuel too. You have to go in there and burn the piles, and then you have to maintain it. So other than the wildland urban interface, not treating the pinyon juniper specifically. That will also cook the trees because you have all this dead material on the ground and you cook the roots. And then the last way is really the best is the piles. And we burn these piles when there's snow on the ground. And it poses a big challenge. So as part of the reason that I'm putting these fuel breaks in first is we can burn those piles on the fuel breaks when there's a lot of snow and they're on ridge lines, so they're a lot easier to burn the piles. And then the stuff that are down in the draws, we can burn it with a lot less snow, or maybe just when it's wet, because we already have those containment lines in place. And then once we've thinned it out, we burned the piles, then we do a broadcast burn, which further reduces the fuel. It raises the canopy by pruning the lower limbs. Fire naturally prunes the lower limbs, and it'll further thin out those weak, dead and diseased trees. Yeah, so on average right now, cutting and piling is between 1,500 and 2,500 on average per acre for cutting and piling. Broadcast burning can be anywhere from $50 to $100 an acre for broadcast burning. Wildfires can be up in $4,000 or $5,000 per acre. That's a hard one there because there's a blank check for wildfire. So the taxpayers, when there's a wildfire, it can get very expensive when you start dropping that slurry.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. I'll add on the private land side. Sometimes the prices can be similar for the thinning, but what happens is that the closer you get to structures, the higher the price goes. The more times you need arborists, the more times you have power lines going to and from a house, and you have sheds and all sorts of complication factors. So that you could at least double the prices the closer you get to home, sometimes more. So that's a challenge facing the landscape. It's just these costs are a lot, and we're doing competitive bid processes, and the prices are not dropping too far from that double what Ryan said, at least double, sometimes triple. And then for prescribed fire, since my organization does do pile burning and broadcast burning, I'll say that if you are standing up an organization to do a prescribed fire, and you don't have people kind of paid year round and like a lot of equipment already on the books, and you have to mobilize all that stuff from scratch, the price per acre is double what Ryan said, so more like $200 to $500 an acre for prescribed fire. When you still less than thinning, but a lot more when you're starting from without all the resources and certified people that the Forest Service has. Should we do more, Ariel, or should we move?
We're probably like 15 minutes past our end point, so maybe we can talk as we're hiking at the next stop.
Okay, the next stop. Okay. Okay, thanks everyone.
Hi. So I was a division supervisor on the Medio fire in 2020. So you probably all remember in 2020 we didn't have a monsoon season, so it was dry. We had signed the Pacheco Canyon Forest Resiliency Project in 2017. Don't quote me on that. I'm not exactly sure if that's the right date, but somewhere around that period. But in May of 2019, we burned the first unit within Pacheco Canyon. That one. It was Cinco de Mayo. Yeah. Were you on there, Ryan? Yeah, the Suke Pueblo were really key. They helped us prep a lot of that unit. But it was a good unit. It burned a little hot in a couple spots, but in the pine, it really cleaned up the understory, did what I talked about, pruning up the trees, etc. In the dry mix conifer, it didn't really burn. There's a big bowl where it didn't really burn in there, but ponderosa pine, it did really good. And then in 2020, we didn't have monsoons, like I said, and we had a lightning strike in Medio down in there, and they had trouble finding it. But once they were able to see the smoke, it was already on the move, and it ran up to the ridge line, down this ridge line. This ridge line separates Pacheco Canyon, Chupadero Creek, and Medio drainage. It ran up out of Medio, and it spotted in Pacheco Canyon, just downstream from where we did this prescribed burn. And it was COVID, so we were all at home. And I could see the column from my house, and I was like, I gotta go, babe. And she was like, I thought you were going first. And I came up here, and Smokey Bear Hot Shots had just put in this line out to the Pacheco fire that happened in 2011. I'm getting long-winded here. Now we're sitting right here. They put in this line here, and they were just anchoring off the Pacheco fire and starting to burn along this line, and they had no idea where they were taking the fire. They were just trying to stay ahead of the Medio fire that was down there in Medio Creek. And there was a big spot down here in Pacheco Canyon, just kind of broiling around down there in the canyon. And I was like, we got this prescribed burn unit right here. We're just going to bring it all the way down the prescribed burn unit down to Forest Road 102, and we'll hang it up there. And meanwhile, we'll prep the 102 road, and we'll take it down the 102 road and stay ahead of the main fire. And that night, they burned all the way down the edge. They burned down this line from the Pacheco to the Pacheco Canyon prescribed burn that we did in 2019. And then they burned this side of the prescribed burn unit, knowing that this was all freshly black and wasn't going to go anywhere, and basically cut off the Medio fire from going up Chupadero Creek and then up into the spruce fir, which was dry that year and wood burned, all the way up to the ski area and possibly into the Santa Fe watershed. And that's what I talk about as far as having an anchor point for firefighters. These prescribed burn units are great for restoring fire to the ecosystem, but they also give us an anchor point when we have a wildfire. Ready-made, no work required, burn off of it, done. Then the next day, we were going to burn down the 102 road, but we put some retardant in on this edge, and we basically secured everything in Pacheco Canyon in 2 days, where it would have taken to prep this ridge line, took us weeks, took Suke Pueblo weeks to prep this burn unit. So then we were able to prep this ridge line that takes it down into the PJ on the other side of Chupadero, but that's downwind, so we had time. This stuff was upwind, so we didn't have time. So it was lucky we had this prescribed burn unit. So that is a great success. I wrote a paper on it that fall about the success. Fuels treatment. My brain's shutting off right now. Yeah, fuels treatment effectiveness. Thanks, Eitan. Report on it. And pretty proud of that. Since then, we burnt this unit over here, the northwest unit. We've thinned all of these units on the south side of the canyon. Those are more dry mix conifer. Sorry about that. Thinned it and piled it. The ridge lines where you got these squiggly lines, those were all masticated. A machine goes in and basically the same prescription, but we grind it up with a machine and put the fuels on the ground. And there was also a fuel break put along this ridge. And going up there, if you look at it, pretty high severity until it hit the ridge there. And it fell on its face when it hit the ridge line and hit that fuel break where it had been thinned out. So you take those ladder fuels out. Even though that thing had a head of steam, when it hit that fuel break, it changed to a lower severity. So great treatment effectiveness, and I'll move on from there because I'll take a lot of time talking.
My name is Ryan Swazel-Hines. I'm the environmental biologist for Pueblo Tisuki Environment and Natural Resource Department. I've been working with the Pueblo since 2005, and so I guess I'll give a little bit of history on the Aspen Ranch and the Vigil Grant properties. So these two properties were homesteads back in like the late 1890s, and then when New Mexico became a state in 1912, the Tisuki Pueblo Grant, which is down over here, was surveyed in 1916. And so when they surveyed that land, there were people homesteading or occupying some tribal land. And so in 1924, during the Pueblo Lands Act, the tribe was compensated money for those acres that were being occupied. So that's how the Pueblo purchased Aspen Ranch and the Vigil Grant in probably the 1930s sometime. So 2005, when I come along, I know that in 2008 there was a forest management plan that was developed by the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and with that forest management plan, it's our foundation on like where we should be focusing treatments. And from like the late 1990s, a lot of our attention was on the Rio Tisuki, and that's where we focused a lot of riparian restoration, dealing with phreatophytes and removal of Russian olive, Siberian elm, and salt cedar. And so 2010, I remember we started getting funding to do, so this is fenced. The Aspen Ranch was fenced, and we started doing some work up here with BIA funding through forest development, HFR, hazardous fuel reduction, forest health, insect and disease. So we were getting little chunks of money to treat like 10-15 acres at a time. And so we were focused on our work at Aspen Ranch for quite some time. 2013, the Pueblo and the U.S. Forest Service, Santa Fe National Forest, signed a memorandum of understanding, a MOU. And so in 2016, when the Fireshed started, getting talked about, that's when the RTRL program came out. So the Pueblo put together a proposal, and talking with Forest Service, that's how the Pacheco Canyon project was identified, and that's a 2,500 acre project. And so it was broken up into the North Pacheco and the South Pacheco. And so with the the North Pacheco, that's where we helped out with some of the cultural resource survey, some of the handline preparation, and some thinning as well. So that's kind of where we got that ball rolling with the RTRL to work outside the box, work off reservation on Forest Service land, and then also in that RTL program you can work on BLM lands. But our focus has been the Forest Service lands. And the reason why we chose this area as well is because of the accessibility with the 102 road, Forest Road 102, and Forest Road 412. And so I'm going to go back to 2014. We started getting some money to do a buffer in the Vigil Grant property. But when I was out there walking around, I was like, I don't know if I'm Forest Service land or tribal land, because that property was not surveyed. So we got that, on the table with Forest Service and said, hey, we got this common boundary. Let's see if we can find some information on identifying if we can survey this. So we use a lot of what was surveyed back in the 1900s, and this Juan de Gabaldon land grant, which is like a 10,000 acre land grant, Spanish land grant. We were able to utilize stones and like trees and stuff that was used, the technology back then of surveying, and then able to find like the more current like brass caps and things of that nature. So that's how that collaborative worked. We were able to finally get it surveyed like around 2016, 17, and then we started doing some fence work. Well, we did the thinning and the burning in what, like, had to have been like after this project. That was in 19, right? When did we burn over there? 2021?
Yeah. Well, yeah, 21 we burned that northwest unit.
So that was the South Pacheco.
In that winter we burned all the piles.
Yeah, so we did the thinning and the piling in Vigil Grant, burned it, and then we started doing the fencing to keep the cattle out. So if you go down the 102 road, you'll run into 2 gates, and that's just to keep the cows out, but close the gate after you go behind yourselves. So yeah, so that's kind of been where RTRL has helped us. And then we started talking about the Santa Fe Mountain Landscape Resiliency Project, which is a 50,000 acre project. And, we've chaired the coalition in 2018, and then we chaired it again in 2023? So yeah, so the Pueblo's been, the tribal participant at the table, coming with land and cultural resource. Like this whole area is our front yard, is how I see it. And we utilize a lot of the mountains for forest products. And so our main focus would like to be on the watershed, the Tsuki watershed. And so that's kind of where the Santa Fe Mountain Landscape Resiliency Project has. Now we're working on a bigger project. Is there any questions? Silence. Oh, there's
How many folks do you have working in your natural resources division that can do this kind of work for the Pueblo?
So we have a director, a grants manager, a forester, water quality specialist, water quality technician, forestry technician. So right now I think there's like 10 of us. But I've seen it up to like maybe 12.
So do you bring in additional like crews when you're doing specific projects, or
Yeah,
is it
so
just you guys
so
holding it down?
It sounds good on paper when you're saying you're going to employ your local people and create jobs and stuff like that. But just when it comes down to trucks and equipment and wear and tear, and we've found that contracting work has been a lot quicker and faster to get the work done.
Makes sense.
Efficient. Ellis.
Talk about prescribed burning on Aspen Ranch or Vigil.
Yeah, so the prescribed burning or fire realm of things, the Pueblo, falls under Department of Interior, Bureau of Indian Affairs, and so we have it's a cooperative fire agreement. I'm guessing that was probably established back in 2010 or something like that. So that's what helps us to assist with wildland fire or prescribed fire. So since 2010, we have all these piles and work that's been done on Aspen Ranch, but we haven't been able to burn those piles because we don't have the qualified staff or personnel. So we look to BIA to help us with providing that trust responsibility, or so yeah, so this one has not been burned. And then the Vigil grant, then we burned that in 2021. But there's another section on the I guess it'd be north of the 102 that, you know, hasn't been treated.
I know that's been a challenge for you. We talked about it. So who was we that was able to burn?
So the we was having a MOU again with Forest Service where there was no like cash exchange or, you know, we're working together. I don't remember, it's called a non-funded something cooperative.
It's a Wyden Authority. It's a non-fund agreement.
Yep. So that's how BIA was able to say, okay, we'll allow Forest Service to, you know, burn or boss that fire. But when it comes to this one, there's a burn plan in place, but it just the capacity with BIA for the monitoring section has been difficult. So you can burn it, but we need people to go and monitor afterwards.
So I wrote the burn plan for both of those burns, and it's multiple signatures on there. You know, the agency administrator for Forest Service and an agency administrator for BIA. And we're willing to burn boss it and help them out burning it. We just we can't be responsible for it after we burn it, and that's where BIA doesn't have the capacity to provide the resources to monitor it until it's completely out, and basically what it comes down to.
Alan, you got a question?
Given that you have the resource files, can you guys not procure it either for yourselves or BIA to third parties to monitor?
I'm pretty sure we could, and you know, as part of the partnership that, you know, being in the Fireshed Coalition, you know, we're a part of the All Hands All Lands team, and so that's given us opportunity to go and get training, hands-on training, work on task books, and so we've gone to Pickeries, we've gone to Taos BLM, we've gone to Santa Fe, like in the Orito, or not Orito, yeah, I think Orito, Coyote. So yeah, so there's that, you know, other, I guess, vehicle that helps us to be able to go and help, and then I guess that vehicle could help them come help us too.
I'll just chime in here that I think it's a broader issue with the BIA, that capacity to support tribes in realizing their like forest management and fire management goals is a widespread challenge, and it existed before the current like shake-up effects to the federal workforce, and it's only getting harder. And if there was a place to create more efficiency in the federal government or to make government work better, that would be a place that could use a lot of improvements.
I think next we have, are there any other questions? We'll have time at the end too. I think next we've got Steve and Alan talking about post-fire impacts from the Medio fire.
Okay, cool. Thanks. There's probably other Steves here. Thanks. We can hold this map up for a brief amount of time, but I won't make you do it too long. Basically, I'm here to talk about the Medio fire and a post-fire watershed stabilization project that we implemented right after the fire. Thank you. You can put the map down.
Oh, okay. Wow, that was easy.
Yeah, it's quite easy, but there's not much to see on there. I didn't bring a map, sorry. My name's Steve Roman. I have a business called Keystone Restoration Ecology. We have about 6 to 8 staff members, mostly doing restoration implementation. We also do design. We work closely with an engineering firm out of Flagstaff called Natural Channel Design, Inc. They are an engineering firm that helped us with some modeling on this project. This project was funded by 319 funding out of NMED, Surface Water Quality Bureau, and they had some funds left over, and we said, do you have any ideas? And I said, thank you very much. We did, and something me and Alan Hayden, who runs NCD, had been thinking about for a long time was how to deal with the post-fire impacts to watersheds. And frankly, one of the biggest impacts is the flooding, as we see in Ruidoso. 5-10 years ago, you'd say, people are like, but what about the forest? Well, the loss of trees is huge, and the impacts to wildlife are huge. But the post-fire flooding impacts are probably the biggest one. And things that can happen are you can lose most of your sediments in the watershed. You can lose the function of your streams, and you can actually lose the ability for that stream to support fish, to provide water to our irrigators, to even feed the watershed and be a stream anymore. I mean, it's a pretty big deal. We saw that in Bandelier when it burned. There was a huge gully formed right through the headquarters of Bandelier. We saw that in Ruidoso. They had some big floods many years ago from a hurricane that parked on top and dumped 12 inches of rain overnight. So these particular type of streams where you have large, ponderosas, firs along the banks, what happens is the stream, when you have a flood, the stream can't increase in size to carry the amount of water. It needs to. The flood is very deep. The force on the bed is very high. Generally, you see widening and deepening of a stream. When you have very, huge old growth trees along the banks, it doesn't widen, it just deepens. And so there's a process called gullying. I think we've all heard of gullies, but gullying is a process, and that can really just gut these streams completely. I want to give a lot of kudos. I had a lot of great partners on this. Micah Kiesau was a great partner. Sandy Herlacher, former ranger, actually got us a CE after the fire before the next summer. And we came in here and we actually designed a bunch of treatments. We used this road, opened this road up, drove all the way down in. Below Aspen Ranch is another meadow, another section, and we built 42 structures using logs, rock we harvested on site. We also did work down above the village, did some work there as well, and also with native materials from on site. And I was patting myself on the head for a long time. I was like, this worked great. We had a bunch of workshops. We had about 100 volunteers come out. The last volunteer workshop was New Mexico Volunteers for the Outdoors. And we literally were at the point where like, well, let's just make these pools deeper so they support the fish better. There's a lot of brook trout in here. Then we had, that summer, I want to say it was 22 or 23, we had 3¼ inches in an hour. And you might have heard how Rio and Medio flooded. Many people lived in the village their whole life. Was like, that flood was nothing. But it was a lot, and it caused a lot of damage. And it caused damage to our structures here, which was, in a way, a good thing, because this was an experimental project. We treated both the main stem of the Rio and Medio, and this is literally like a mile that way. I keep pointing that way. And we also treated a lot of the tributaries that were burned. And those tributaries come out of the mountains, and this is kind of a landform feature, and they hit alluvial fans where the water spreads in kind of the shape of my hands, and then hits the river. And we modified some of those fans. In one fan we modified, it's where we mined our rocks, we caught about 2,000 yards of sediment, which could have created a dam on the Rio and Medio and very much changed how that stream functioned. Another fan, we moved it into the meadow where we shouldn't have, and it caused a 10-foot gully. So we learned a lot from that treatment. It's like, okay, you got to think about where you're moving the water to, and maybe we should have dug down there deeper. And we have machinery, we could have looked and saw it was underneath the ground. It was 10 feet of topsoil. It's really beautiful. Now that we can see it all. That's a joke. It was not a good process. So we had some learning experiences here. What else do I want to share on this project? It probably could use retreatment. I've talked to Micah about how we could come back in and address some areas that got impacted. This stream also has some very beautiful brook trout. It could be a really interesting place to reintroduce cutthroats to, because as you come further down from this area, you hit a bunch of waterfalls, beautiful waterfalls that would be nice fish barriers from brown trout moving upstream. And yeah, we had a lot of learning on this one. So I just wanted to share that idea. I think overall, we're seeing the watershed impacts from fire. And I've been on the phone with a lot of people in Ruidoso this week. The impacts can be extreme. And those are impacts that happen if we don't do the thing that's been talked about today. Those impacts will come to our mountain communities. And I hate to say it, but the future is scary, because if this watershed, whatever watershed goes up, you have floods that could be 10 or 20 feet deep. And the issue with Ruidoso, and I did an assessment of the watershed, so I can say this with some knowledge, is there wasn't a lot of setback from the river. There was a lot of development happening piecemeal. People own a little piece of land, they get to build a cabin on it. There wasn't a lot of room left for the river in the floodplain. And the impacts of that, well, the river will go onto its floodplain and make that room that is needed. So I think some planning's going on there, and people are talking about buying people out, creating floodplains, creating areas for the floods to happen, because those floods will happen for many years in the future. Another thing that happens is once you have that initial flood, I keep getting calls on this, so there's a big flood that happened in Medinales. It also hit Santa Clara Pueblo. In Medinales, what's happened is a lot of those arroyos poured out, plugged the Chama River, And it was a really big deal because that's the way we transport water, our water rights downstream to Albuquerque and to Texas and to Mexico. And so that became a really big issue really fast. But I was talking to the Acequia folks up there, the Upper Chama Acequia Association last week, and we all kind of agreed that, that place will flood more now. Because once you have the big flood, that was an extreme flood. That was 8 inches of rain, 7 inches of rain in a very short time. But once you strip the landscape of the grass and the soil, because that flood is an extreme event that's not something we've seen in 100 years, now it's more likely to flood. And so just to give a plug for me and other people in this field of restoration, like the way to address that now is to go back in there and try to address that watershed, spread the water back out, hold that material in place, and grow grass again. I mean, it's going to take a more active management to manage our watersheds, unfortunately, because we'd like to step back and let it be. But a lot of these places are getting hit pretty hard. That's my little pitch for the day. Any questions about this project? I know we're not looking at it, so it's hard to question, but any questions in general? Yeah.
Is any watershed restoration part of the mountain resiliency project planning, in addition to the fire bit? Are you guys already building in some water bits?
Well, so in the early planning stages there was, but then there was so the Santa Fe Mountains Resilience Project is a National Environmental Policy Act signed project. At the same time as that was happening, there was a second large-scale watershed restoration EIS or EA. This was just 2 different levels. Yeah, thanks. Environmental assessment for the Cibola, Santa Fe, and Carson National Forest. So, and I wish Jacob Q was here, but maybe you know. Jacob works at the Forest Service. I believe that the watershed restoration was backed out of the Mountains Resiliency Project because there was that. Yeah, I'm getting some nodding heads from Claudia and Forest Service staff because there was that large scale across the entire forest planning document signed. So, so I think the opportunity in this landscape is now really open to improve streams and tributaries or road situations that are culverts leading to problems because we have that big EA in place.
That was super important. Previously, it was hard to work on the Forest Service because you would have to come in, and these grants are 3 to 4 year grants. You'd have to get NEPA done in 2 years and then get your grant done, and that's a lot of stress on Forest Service staff. So they were visionary and said, let's get this area cleared for watershed restoration over 3 entire forests. Choose the type of work, and then it's really, there's a checklist to go through, but you can get these things done fairly quickly. Basically, you need maybe some environmental assessment, and you need archaeology, but it's much faster, and that's really cool.
Well, Steve, can you kind of talk about costs for actual dollars and then time, I guess? And
Thank you.
How big your
Sure
workforce
thing.
is?
Well, we have about 5 to 7 people in machines at any one time, fairly small. We have to kind of roll project to project to keep them employed. So, but basically, this project was $140,000. We treated 2 separate areas. We built maybe 70 structures total. That is frankly fairly cheap in terms of restoration. A lot of it's kind of the mystery about these projects is every watershed is unique. We don't know what would have happened up here, for instance, if we hadn't treated it. Down below in the village of Rio Medio, there was a lot of damage, and I feel like our work might have helped a little, but honestly, it's all buried because what happens in a lot of these, just sort of structurally, is you have you have a cascading debris dam, and you have these issues where so much material comes down. What literally happened is this wall of trees, it looks like a fence of ginormous trees piled up, and then one side of it broke. And that happened right above the Narrows in Rio Medio. And so above that, the watershed's in pretty good condition. I mean, it got affected, but the ponderosas are still there. It still looks like the same stream. Below that, it doesn't, because this 3 1/4 inch flood that came down at 1,000 CFS or something turned into a reservoir, which then burst. So that's something that's it was very impactful. But in terms of, I think it's much cheaper to get in after the fire, much cheaper. It's sort of a question of, do we wait for the fire effects to end and then treat the watershed, or do we treat right away? And I would vote for treating right away. I know other people vote otherwise, and they have good reasons for saying that as well. There is a risk, like I said here, that you have a storm that's so big that, you were dropping the bucket, and why did we spend that money? But honestly, it wasn't that much to spend. So, does that address some of your questions, Porfirio?
Yeah,
okay.
I think so.
All right, thank you, good question.
So in Tesuque, I have been working with our hydrologist to work in some restoration in Tesuque Creek down in the bottom for 2 reasons. The the conifer is encroaching in the riparian area, so it's choking out a lot of the riparian vegetation. Plus, you get that conifer in there, that white fir, the Doug fir, burns really well. Doesn't burn very well when you're doing a broadcast burn, but it burns really well during the summertime when you have a wildfire. That's what causes the soil damage and causes the downstream flooding. So one, we're dealing with the fire problem, and two, we're dealing with the conifer encroachment in the riparian area. And it's some challenges there. We can't pile and burn piles within the riparian area. We have to move the material a little bit farther. It costs a little bit more, but you know, we'll see how that works out. I do have a little bit of experience in the Santa Fe watershed. 2011, we thinned the hotshot crew when I was on there. We thinned along the riparian area, and if you ever go up there to Agua Sarca, where we have a lot of the tours there, I don't know where the beavers went, but there's some bunch of beaver dams in there.
Nice.
That was pretty choked in with white fir and Doug fir, and we thinned a lot of that out, and in came a lot of willow in there, and the beavers moved in there, and for quite a few years there was big ponds in there. So, you know, it worked out. We also did a broadcast burn through there, I think, which kind of invigorated the growth.
Good job. I want to bring up one thing that we've worked on many years ago, and we were just kind of talking, me and my colleague Alan. We hooked up with Eric Litzenberg, who was worked with you at the time, and Eric was a part of this Wildland Fire Leadership Council. And I know there's people at higher levels than me. I'm looking at you, my dear. Sorry. I want to mention this. There is a leadership council at the federal level that basically was working on, right then they were working on smoke issues. Like, how do we do controlled burns? How do we get EPA permission to do controlled burns? How do we address the pollution from fire? And we were talking to a guy named Mike Zipko, at the time was the leader of that. He was a sort of I wasn't really an employee, maybe it was a contractor, but he ran that council at that level. And I said, what do you have set up for post-fire flooding? And he said, well, we got this paragraph called Fire, Flood, and Mud. That's all they had 6 or 8 years ago to think about post-fire flooding. And the reason is, I want to say there's generally a bifurcation between watershed restoration and fire. And we're kind of in different worlds. The fact that I don't know many of you is kind of the different worlds we work in. We work for different departments at the state. We don't always talk together all the time. And we kind of need to be, because it's all one ecosystem. It's all connected. And now we see, we know that post-fire flooding is an issue. We pictured it being an issue. We saw it being, and now we're seeing the issues that are literally lethal issues. People are dying from these things. And so it's an emergency, and it's kind of one of these things that it's like, well, there may be a little piece to play, but everybody's got a part to play in this. It's like, we thin to prevent flooding. We can talk about the trees, but really we thin for all of us just living here. We need water to survive in the desert. We need these watersheds to act to produce water for us. And so it's really it was kind of shocking at the time that there wasn't, even at that level, there was no real thought about it, because it's such a complex issue. And most of the work was done to restore watersheds to an ecologically sustainable and historic condition. And it's considered separate from water and separate from streams. And that's just how science works, and that's just how funding works, and that's how departments work. And so it's been hard to bridge that gap. Really, it's sort of get called in at the end. What are we going to do in Ruidoso now? I don't know. A house floated by last week. What am I supposed to do? I can't touch that. But somebody needs to be thinking about that. Down there, it's their state legislature. Harlan is working on it. But it really ends up being catch as catch can. Once it happens, it's a disaster. And bear teams are not tasked with fixing that disaster. They have a discrete role. We end up having to go through NEPA, which at least we have that now. But then there's not a funding source for just addressing post-fire flooding. At the state level, there's something called river stewardship funding, which I'm lucky to get some of every year. But that's a yearly thing. We have to keep advocating for it. And can there be a dedicated source of funding for our watersheds that say there's a fire, there's gonna be a huge need, more than these little 300,000 projects or $500,000 projects. I mean, the funding sources are huge. And just to really go off, it's like, sorry to keep talking, but when FEMA comes in, they have a set of how they do work. FEMA actually is tasked with never changing the original design of what it was built. If the bridge is too small, they must build that bridge back to the same size. This has been a flooding issue. This has been a FEMA issue for 20 years. It's like they are tasked with bringing things back to what they were, not improving upon them with modern engineering techniques and modern design techniques and what we know now, they build things back to where they were. Now, they don't do just that, but in general, if you say, let's fix this bridge, it's hard to change from the original design. They're here to bring it back. And that's just how the legislation works for them. So there's kind of maybe a missing gap here in, I'm saying, in funding, in planning for, Rio Medio, actually 3 or 4 people were affected poorly. That was no big deal, honestly. And when FEMA came in to help them with something, they couldn't find contractors to do the work. As far as I know, there was 2 years of work done to protect those houses from more flooding, and nobody would do it. So that's dead in the water.
Steve, can I add to that?
Sure.
So the post-fire space is a whole world. It's a whole world unto itself. And Steve, thanks for kind of taking us from kind of like this one scale to the big scale. And I will say that there's a few groups working on this. There's one group that's kind of connected to the Fire Adapted Communities Learning Network, which is thinking before, during, and after fires. And there's a post-fire community of practice, and I'd love to invite you. I'm sure your time is precious, and I don't know how much time you have for this, but it's a group of people from around the country that are thinking about how to make changes, how to fix this broken post-fire system. And you heard a lot of acronyms, like burned area emergency response, FEMA. Like there's just fortunately a broken network of nodes that aren't talking to each other, and they each have their own idiosyncrasies, and it's just a problem. And because of climate change and hotter, drier reality, we need to address that. And of course, Maury joked to me that it's not a problem anymore if we get rid of FEMA, and, which is on the table in the national news, right? So that is, if there's no FEMA, maybe all their rules don't come into play, but what happens after flooding disasters?
What replaces
and other natural disasters? Like what replaces it? What are we going to build as a society to make these systems better? And I think that's the more interesting question, and I don't have an answer, but
good job.
But I want to invite you to that group.
Well, thank you. That's wonderful. And I say I'm probably 8 years behind. Like I've been busy building stuff. There could be a lot of things I'm not mentioning that are happening on this space, but in general, if we're taking the same funding that would say fix a wetland over here, and we're saying, oh, we've got a huge fire over here, and we're tapping this, basically this year was $5 million for river stewardship, the disasters are bigger than that already. And this year, the disasters are that much bigger than that again. And everybody on Calf Canyon is still waiting for their FEMA money, or a lot of them are, and it does seem mostly broken, and they don't want to see, and because of that, they don't want to see controlled burns. I mean, we're just going around in circles. So, any answers? Any positive news here? Yes, Garrett.
No, just to comment on that. I think New Mexico is uniquely positioned, especially with our state representatives in attendance here, that we know that the federal government wants us to have this shift to more state responsibility to the states. And programs like the River Stewardship Program have been instrumental in the watershed approach, but we also need that for the fire resilience component. And having a pre-disaster mitigation fund is gonna, just like FEMA's understands, you have a 7-to-1 return on your investment if you can address the disaster before it happens. And what we don't see right now, what I really appreciated Steve saying, is that forest health is directly linked to water security and watershed health. And bringing all those together and having state dedicated funds to continue these, not just for one watershed, but a dozen throughout the state, is ultimately what's needed, I think.
I agree. Yeah.
All right, Alan, you
thank
want
you.
to say a few
Yeah, I
words?
guess I'm up.
Good job, Steve.
Thank you, Ron.
Garrett,
Thanks
you
for
guys all
inviting me.
covered what I was going to
Appreciate
talk about, so I'm going to wrap it. No. I'm going to actually use map. I'm going to shift gears back to kind of the core of the municipal watershed, and to the point about water security. We as a utility, I work for City of Santa Fe in the water utility. We have done a lot of work, a lot of prescriptions to protect our sources. You got Nichols here, and mainly you can see McClory here. again, provides 40% of our water supply. In 2019 and 2023, it actually provided 70% of our drinking water supply. So I contracted with Ellis Margolis, our principal investigator, for this research paper. Manny Lopez was key to this. This was his graduate study research on post-fire debris flows. It was really looking at the watershed and all the, what is it, over 110 basins, Ellis, sub-basins were analyzed. And kind of, if you think about a 3x3 matrix, fire intensity using flame maps, 75th percentile burn, 90th percentile burn, and it's what, 97th on the third. And then looking at fire intensity following that burn, it would be a 2-year event, which is about ½ an inch per hour. A 5-year event, that's going to be about 0.7 inches in an hour. And then we have across the state of New Mexico probable maximum precipitation, and that is well over 12 inches in an hour. I'm just going to really talk about the 2-year, 5-year, because that's typically what you'll get in a monsoon. The PMP is kind of like Noah's Ark. If we get, you know, that kind of level, it doesn't matter how much low intensity burning or moderate, it's just going to start coming down, because these are granitic soils in this watershed, and it's going to mobilize. So looking at that matrix, in the 75th percentile, this was a previous area that was treated in 2016, and then this half followed up in 18. The results showed if you were in a 75 percentile burn intensity and you got like ½ an inch to even the 0.6, you're yielding about maybe 0.3 up to 20 acre feet into this reservoir, and this reservoir holds about 3,900 acre feet. If you don't know, an acre foot is about an acre with a foot deep, and that's 325,000 gallons approximately. So pretty minimal with the treatment area. These basins up here, you're easily below Thompson Peak, gonna get over 200 to 300 acre feet. Total, kind of what Manny showed through this whole watershed, you know, the moderate to high severity burn and a 90th percentile, you're probably gonna get at least 20% minimum of this reservoir filled, and at the maximum, almost all of it would be filled with sediment. That's a big risk for us as a water utility, a big, big risk. That means we got to rely on over here, San Juan Chama project water, which is coming from Colorado, and then secondarily, about 40% of our supply would have to be pumped out of the groundwater near the Rio Grande in our city well field for a very long time. You know, Santa Clara, you're talking 10 years. So that's the risk route. The good news is, though, these treated areas reduce the risk of that sediment and debris flow by 40%. So these are the things we're looking at, only because we don't have an emergency action plan for that. I mean, I hate to break the news, we're really not prepared for that. We have emergency action plans for breaching the dams if you had a major flood event, but that's under normal conditions. We don't have a post-fire debris flow emergency action plan for all of you who live downstream of these reservoirs. And we're getting there, because first we needed this big, beautiful research project to give us the data. Just pulling in some terminology in the modern times. But it was a real eye-opener for all of us, for our decision makers, for utility managers to be like, oh, wow. And more importantly, you know, forget the reservoirs themselves. How are we even going to get up there to mitigate it? What's the plan? How are we going to get the debris out? Our original EIS, there was ideas under the 2001 EIS when the Forest Service was looking at doing treatments. Hey, maybe we could get some wood out. The communities downstream said, we don't want logging trucks up here. Well, you're going to have sand trucks coming up and down to actually get this debris out there. And then how much are we going to pay to dispose of that? So these are real threats that we're all dealing with. I appreciate Steve's points about all of this. This is a watershed scale. These are things that we have to discuss across agencies, and that we're trying to work on. I appreciated, I can't say enough about having this kind of data and information to then move forward and say, okay, what is our next steps? Are we putting in hardening structures? How do we work with the Forest Service on public lands to maybe get further treatments beyond the treated area in the transition zone that I feel like is really becoming at high risk above these reservoirs, but even in the mixed conifer and into the wilderness. We have an EA in the wilderness, but is that feasible in these times? Because our utilities is very much at risk. We won't be able to rely on this for a very long time if we get impacted. So I just want to put that out there. Again, I appreciate practitioners on a daily, weekly, monthly, seasonally that are trying to address post-fire impacts. But I think it's one of the bigger things that haven't always been thought through by communities, besides trying to do the treatments up front, getting fire on the ground, improving the landscape resiliency, improving the health of these watersheds, is what is our plan afterward if we do see fire, and we will see fire. I mean, it's been 1880, 1600 since it's been in here, so it's coming. So I don't want to scare everybody, but we're working on this. Many people are working on this across the scale, and I appreciate all of you being here to learn about this.
Questions?
I know we've talked about cost of project work, but as a utility, like what is your capacity or budget to contribute, or like I guess, yeah, like to contribute to some of this project work, and how is that prioritized for you all?
Well, we do have funding through our ratepayers. So like right now, here's a cost analysis. So values at risk. We're spending about $20 million redoing this reservoir in our dam right now at Nichols. That's the smaller one. We'll probably spend about another $30 million working on McClure, because it's about 100 years old, I think, at the end of 29. And so we do have capacity with bonding. It's just a matter of like convincing pretty much engineers and managers to invest in the green infrastructure instead of what's called gray infrastructure: pipes, dams, reservoirs, pumps. So that's kind of where we need the impetus of the public, because we are a community-owned utility. So people going to their decision makers, their counselors, commissioners, legislators to say, hey, we're willing to put money where our mouth is and actually get work done. We want to see planning. What if this does go? What is your plan? And so, we do have capacity to raise the funds. We have the capacity through rate increases. It wouldn't take much to actually, do some of this recovery work, but it would be a long time, because even if these became sediment basins, let's say, and we got the sediment out eventually, to treat the water, our treatment process isn't made to treat ash. It really isn't, or fine grained ash sediment. So you have to take that into account. How do you change your treatment process? A lot of utilities in Colorado have mentioned this. You also have to pay for all of that to be disposed of. Like, they didn't plan on tipping fees at dumps or transfer stations. So that becomes part of the treatment train and the actual costs. Any other questions? If not, thank you for being here.
Giving some history on the environment department. Pueblo Tesuque had an environment department established in 1994, and then they got water quality or treatment as a state in 95, and then water quality standards in 1996. So that gives the tribe the ability to go for Clean Water Act 106 funding, non-point source 319 funding, and we also combined it with the general assistance grant called the GAP program with EPA. So that's how I got involved with working with EPA, was doing the tech work, assisting with the EPA grants we have. And what consists with those grants is monitoring surface water. So our program has, we do 3 different types of sampling. The main sampling we do is weekly parameters with the SON. We put in a SON into the water, let it sit and collect dissolved oxygen, pH, conductivity, and turbidity, and we do that at 10 different locations. The Rio Medio, we have one site, and that's usually near this area. It shifts depending what the water is doing. Since I've been here, we moved it along maybe 3 different sites. One was for a flood that came through back in 18, so it changed the meanders of the river and the flow. The second time we moved it, there was a blowdown on some trees, the old growth trees, so we had to shift our site again. But on part of the weekly parameters, we do flow measurements. And so we compare our flow measurements with the USGS gauge down on the Rio Tsuki. So Rio Tsuki has 2 USGS gauges. One is off-site on the boundary where the Forest Service land and public land boundary line is. And then the other gauge is on the Pueblo Tsuki near the ponds off of the Bishop's Lodge Road right before you get to Tsuki Village, Trailer Village. Our other monthly sampling we do is E. coli and nutrient sampling, and we do analyze those in-house. We have a makeshift lab where we use IDEX as our equipment for E. coli. And then for the nutrients, we're testing nitrate, nitrites, ammonium, TKN, and phosphorus. And we use the HAWK test kits with the spectrophotometer. We do annual sampling and quarterly sampling. It's full spectrum. So we do tests for rads, dissolved metals, all those higher spectrum or finer spectrum analysis that we ship to a lab in Albuquerque. And then we do macroinvertebrate biological sampling. And we actually have a site just downstream from here that we've been monitoring for a few years now. But that kind of just shifts as we do like a pre-visit and assess which has the best habitat or the most representative habitat. And then that's where we determine where to do those macroinvertebrate sampling. But here on the Rio Tsuki, there's also a tributary river. It's not really a river, it's a tributary run drainage that's just right next to the boundary east of here. And so an issue that's affected the Pueblo back in October of 23 was the implementation of the power line upgrade for the JMEC, Jemez Mountain Electric Co-op power line. And so there was some implementation of access roads to get the equipment in, which caused erosion features and a new road development that we're currently working with Forest Service and the contractors there that Jemez Mountain Electric is determining who to work with. So we developed a working group from that event that happened in 2023. Kind of touching base on what Ryan mentioned earlier with that MOU with Forest Service, that allows us to not just do fire off land, but that issue affecting our water and water quality here on the Medio and the tribal portion. Having those prior relationships, we're able to work with other stuff such as water quality, erosion control, and kind of combined our minds and our disciplines to see how we're going to mitigate that restoration. Another issue, well, not really an issue, but some future projects we're looking into is reintroduction of native cutthroats, because we got nice habitat here, but we got to look for barriers and determine what species are currently in this Rio Medio stretch within the Pueblo boundary. And also, again, falling back on those interagency relations, we have a MOA, Memorandum of Agreement, or understanding with BLM and Forest Service on the Caja del Rio, and that was established in November of 2024. And out of kind of that co-stewardship agreement, we were doing a cleanup back in May, and we met some NGOs, American Rivers, and some other NGOs that we had them come back in June to assess our habitat, to kind of collaborate and determine where's the starting point to begin that step to establish the Rio Grande cutthroat restoration. And kind of mentioning how tribes wear multiple hats. Garrett was part of that site visit with his NGO. So Tasuki is evolving with these relationships with multiple agencies, not just with forests, but water and other stuff like that. Steve mentioned natural channel design, and we were a host site for their level 2 fluvial geomorphology training back in, I think it was October 24. So we're kind of branching out, and it's a good opportunity for us to learn all these different disciplines because everything overlaps. So it's ecology. It's more ecology because you got water quality, forestry, wildfire, wildlife, and that's kind of, I think, where we want to try to evolve to, because we do have the forestry and wildland. We got the water quality, but now what's the next step that we bump our program to? And only thing holding us back is capacity and funding, because a lot of tribal programs are doing a lot of multiple things that you go to the state, you go to the federal agency, you got 2-3 people working on specific tasks. You go to tribal environment, you're doing like 4 other positions or 4 other departments just to try to get your program off the ground or build relationships to find those funding sources. So that's, I think I'm learning a lot working with Tasuki. My knowledge from when I started to now, it's not where I want it to be, but it's a lot higher from 8 years ago. So just anticipating what the future has for the Pueblo and for our staff, seeing how our staff has evolved too for the years they've worked with us, where they started at entry level and becoming program managers. That's beneficial, not just for our staff, but for the Pueblo and the community members, because that's who we work for, is the Pueblo, Tasuki, and their tribal members. So when those concerns come to us, or something was overlooked, or they're hearing headlines in other areas, they bring them to our attention, and then we have that concern and that voice to bring that to the attention of leadership and bring it to the attention of NGOs, federal agencies, and state agencies. And Pueblo Tasuki's leadership is pretty proactive in getting their concerns out there and having those relationships within the state legislator, DC level. So sometimes we get involved in those discussions as well, and it's just a good a place to learn and build our capacity. And that's all I have to say right now.
Thank you.
Thank
Any
you.
Question?
Yeah, I have a question. How is the water quality?
The water quality is pretty good, but E. coli elevates naturally with the change in the temperature. Because of higher temperatures, the E. coli is able to survive longer. And with sediment transportation, I don't know if the sediment and E. coli kind of coordinate with each other. Well, I guess it does because of the runoff from the tributary drainages into the river streams. So you're getting wildlife sources, maybe sometimes it's human, but our main concern is cattle. So like 2 years ago, you would have seen a lot of cow patties around this area, but thanks to Chris and his crew, they re-fenced the whole boundary of Aspen Ranch and come up and monitor and do fence repairs. And when we're driving out from here, I don't know if you guys are gonna go down or you're gonna go back up. But if you go back down, you'll see the gates that Ryan mentioned earlier, that the RTRL program was able to implement. They're not lock gates, but it's just preventing that access from the livestock getting into the tribal properties and affecting our tribal water quality for cultural activities and stuff like that. That's the main priority when it comes to surface water. Any other questions?
Cool. Do you want to say anything, Chris? Or?
Something real quick, hopefully, I don't know. But I'm the RTRL coordinator, Chris Tafoya, from Santa Clara Pueblo. Work for Tasuki as the RTRL coordinator. You know, what is RTRL? Reserve Treaty Rights Land Coordinator. It's, let's see, federal funding available to tribes to work across boundaries of the reservation and in collaboration with Forest Service, BLM, private NGOs. So it's really been a foundation for the tribe, I think, as far as having a voice at the table. You know, it's built a lot of relationships from boots on the ground, partnerships to leadership levels, government to government relations, MOUs and co-stewardship signing agreements. It's played a key role in a lot of things, in opening doors for the tribe. So I'm sorry I couldn't join you guys on the hike, so I'm not sure what Ryan said up there, but the future of our TRL right now is kind of in the air, but we're working, we're hashing things out with our agency and hoping for the best and to get back on board with the Fireshed Coalition. This is Aspen Ranch where we're at right now. We do have projects that pretty much Aspen Ranch and VHIL grant are completed. With completed projects, we'll just continually maintenance them. You do see piles though. That's one of our I guess, setbacks is trying to get fire back into our lands. It comes down to a lot of political play, I guess you could say, politics. Again, we're hashing those things out with our agency, which we're pretty much at the mercy of our agency. And I know Forest Service, private NGOs are willing to help out, but it comes down to, you know, us being at the mercy of our agency. So it is a fight. Yeah, BIA, the Bureau. So we're hoping for the best, and hopefully we get these piles burned this fall, like we were told we were going to get them burned last fall, but we'll see. But yeah, that's basically RTRL in a nutshell. And these were actually, RTRL, like I said, it's funding for off-reservation. This was actually little pockets of money through hazardous fuels reduction, HFR money, which was available through the Bureau as well. They could dish out the money, but they just can't help out with any burns or anything, you know, so we're cutting away, thinning forest, but we just can't. There's the piles, there's the fuel left on the ground, you know. It needs to be a solution.
You mentioned RTRL is in question. Is the funding potentially being cut, or what? Say more about that, or?
Oh well. Oh gosh, this is more of a, I guess, a local level type situation with our agency. They recently switched. This is what they're saying. They recently switched to a new program of entering in reporting and whatnot. And some of those reports from RTR didn't make it to the new system, to the new software, whatever. And it kind of threw a flag. So we're kind of hashing that out with the agency to get back on track so we can apply for funding.
So Chris, with RTRL, the authority is still there. There's just some like local report tracking problems, because I feel like the authority is the important thing not to lose, because then you have the authority and then you can have funding and like permission to work across boundaries.
Yeah, I mean, there's other ways of going around. I mean, we don't have to go through RTR. There's other funding available that will allow, it's just limited, and will allow us to work off the reservation. So, and I have had applied for some of those grants. Just kind of cross my fingers and hopefully the funding comes in, so we can get back
funding that we've gotten in the past, like with the VHIL grant project, was Rio Grande Water Fund.
Right.
So that's, you know, sometimes we have to piecemeal or find different resources to help with projects.
Okay, any other questions? Cool. Well, we are almost at the time when we said we were going to leave. I don't know if folks feel like they can stick around for maybe an additional, like, 10 minutes, and we were thinking of just doing a little, like, popcorn of, I know we've talked about a lot of the needs and hurdles to get over to implementing more forest health treatments out here. But if people maybe have anything that's like top of mind, that's something that would really help us do more of these projects, that you want to shout out and discuss, or ways that you've thought of today that maybe we could talk to each other about working together to get things done. So
one thing we're thinking about is beaver reintroduction as well, and then fish passage, trying to replace culverts with more like a bridge versus, you know.
Where would you do beaver down in Beaver? Or
We're just kind of
here?
thinking, you know, well, there's the waterfalls,
Yeah.
so the waterfalls is going to, you know, inhibit any other species coming up this way, but within here and going upstream of us, so, you know, it's a cold water fisheries.
Yeah.
So it's brook trout in here, and in the past there's been rainbow trout that's been stocked. But yeah, this would be an ideal spot. And then we've been working with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service back in the day. We did native trout in the classroom at the Tusuki Elementary School. So we got to learn and teach kids, 5th graders I believe, and we would take them out to the Rio Grande and release those trout into the waters. And then when that program went away, we started working with Trout Unlimited, and we got an aquarium installed at the library at the Pueblo. And so we've been helping with raising rainbow trout. And so those rainbow trout were taken to the Pecos River and released over at Pecos.
So the goal with that aquarium is to have a high survival rate with the eggs of the rainbow trouts that we're getting, and eventually have that success rate to back us being able to rear our own Rio Grande cutthroats, like the Rio Grande cutthroats in the classroom again. So that's kind of where that spin-off from the assisting U.S. Fish and Wildlife and then working with Trouts Unlimited to get those rainbow trouts. And so I think the library's been hosting that for the last 3 years. So that's continuing. But the goal of that is to have that success rate so we can get those Rio Grande cutthroats brought here. And maybe someday when the habitat and everything's established, the passages, then we can just dump them, or not dump them, but bring them, reintroduce them back to Suki's land here.
And then other collaboratives that we're a part of currently, we have funding through the NNF, National Forest Foundation, Collaborative Capacity Program. So, you know, that's how we're able to participate in the Fireshed and the co-stewardship with the MOU, BLM and Forest Service. We would like to have another co-stewardship agreement, but for these mountains, the Sangres. So, you know, that's another goal that we're, you know, aspiring. Hopefully would happen, but, you know, who knows. But, yeah, that's, you know, another source of way that we can build capacity and what can we bring to the table. Like, you need us to have signs, or can we go do some work on a river, or, you know, there's various things.
I think we've, just to elaborate on some of this stuff, tried to tie it into this watershed, but also this group. You know, we keep hearing about partnerships at every stop today and the importance of that, and to really have a landscape scale of effect. It takes multiple entities, it takes our tribes, it takes our indigenous knowledge and participation, but it also takes our bureaucracies and our state level and our funding to all come together. And a lot of times braiding funding is a big term now, of using multiple funding sources to achieve, you know, either unified or multiple objectives. But, you know, Joe came to me a couple years ago, he's like, are there opportunities to put native fish back on the Pueblo? And this watershed in particular is really one that we've honed in on in the past year, 2 years, you know, top 3 in the state for a number of regions. And one is largely because of this group and the efforts that have been occurring on the fire side and the forest health side, but also, you know, the fact that there's a pretty substantial amount of water in the stream. It supports 4 downstream tribal pueblos, multiple communities, Aseki associations, and user groups, and trying to bring everybody to the table to really see that this is the heart of that water, and taking care of this is going to yield longer term, more sustainable benefits and more resilient benefits for drought. If we can really turn these upland areas that catch the water and really hold it and turn it into a sponge so it's continually flowing. And then finding opportunities where I work in my realm is really trying to find opportunities to maximize these resources. What do we have here? You know, Chris, he walks up today when I come in, he's like, where can we put some ponds in here? It's like, actually, we've been thinking about that, you know, and really finding this a great opportunity to introduce beaver. We're hearing a lot about beaver even really contributing to fuel breaks by promoting riparian vegetation and even acting as a buffer for fire. Sometimes I think it's a little bit too much reliance on it, but it does happen. And then the other thing is just biodiversity. Our stream corridors and riparian areas in general in the southwest contain over 90% of the biodiversity on the landscape. You know, the butterflies and we have coming around and the fish and as you mentioned, all the wildlife that congregates here. So where can we create more opportunities to expand those riparian areas so that it's not just a 6-foot little incised stream coming down or gullying, as Steve mentioned, and finding opportunities like this relic oxbow here or stream channel. Like, is that a place we can divert water into and create a larger aquatic system up here, have vegetation so there's shade and you're monitoring the water quality, but you're also creating new water storage facilities and also creating hazard mitigation facilities. If there's a flood in this or some debris flows that come through, they can actually catch and they're designed to fill up and become a sediment retention basin from a mitigation perspective. So multi-benefits in a lot of the treatments we do. Fish is a little more specific, but when we talk about passage and culverts and crossings, there's a New Mexico aquatic connectivity team that's developed in the last 8 months. That's a consortium of partners involved, including the Forest Service, and we're looking at doing inventories of culverts. So I don't know, I was crawling under the Big Tasuki culvert because that was one we had on our radar to inventory because there's immediately upstream there's a relic old concrete dam. What's the effect? How significant of a barrier is that if these streams get Rio Grande cutthroat back in them, or if we maintain the brook trout population so they can still connect and get all the way up to the spawning grounds and reconnect and have a more sustainable, vibrant population. But partnerships, I also worked Pueblo Santa Clara, and the former governor there was very inspirational in gatherings like this. And he says, you know, the creators all put us here because we all have a certain talent and a reason and something that we contribute. And they manage their watershed as a big puzzle, and all the projects tie together. There's no standalone pieces. But everybody that comes to these gatherings is encouraged to speak up and share their thoughts, whether it's a school educator or student at the elementary level or a PhD researcher. You know, say it. You have something to contribute, and sometimes it's really far-fetched, and sometimes that far-fetched comes back and go, you know what, we might be able to actually do part of that. And I think that's the power of groups like this, is we all have the experience and the know-withals within our respective disciplines, and getting together is important, which I think is why a lot of us are here today. So thank you, Eitan, and your crew, and Maya for organizing this. We appreciate coming out. And then, I guess, how do we get more of these projects? That's what we're trying to do. Like, this is one watershed. One thing we're finding is a lot of these areas are on Forest Service land. How can we work with the agency to do these watershed scale assessments that they're prioritizing now before you can come in and implement? And that process takes 3 to 5 years. Once you're on the radar that they're willing to do it. And it's not a matter of willingness, it's also a matter of limited capacity. You know, they have 1 or 2 people for the whole forest, and trying to get them engaged on a particular watershed is great, and we have this as one of those. But where I'm trying to find opportunity is we have more than 3 or 4 watersheds, and that's all they can get to. So are there other mechanisms we can look at, whether it be in an emergency CAD-X context, or how can we do more implementation and more treatments and really improve the speed of the process of these, rather than just doing one watershed at a time when we've got hundreds in the state. And there's no easy answer, but we're always looking for opportunities. So when folks come across, you know, successful stories of that, those are always really valuable, because you can reference those, especially if they're with another agency. We're like trying to look at the NRCS now. What are they doing in some of their planning? that might be able to serve as a template for the Forest Service to improve some of their processes. Because when somebody else has done, especially at the federal level, we find a lot quicker adoption of those practices rather than trying to start from scratch and be like, what if we did this? Well, that takes 10 or 20 years. So yeah, just the way we try to navigate the system, and it's kind of like the funding, but the permitting and the planning process is very extensive and takes a lot of time and resources that ultimately we prefer to put on the ground rather than into the planning. So streamlining that is definitely a priority. Thank you. That's all I have.
Steve mentioned he had a volunteer crew come out here, and it was really impressive to see this crew and how motivated they were. But what I wanted to touch on was the public participation element. We see a lot of us working within our context, and we're well aware of what we're doing, but the public, for the most part, is not aware of this. They're not aware of the successes. They're not aware of the benefits a lot of time. And I think that's a gap in place we're trying to fill. You know, having workshops with school children, or having you know, volunteer crews like Steve brought out, those are, I think, often overlooked as opportunities where we can really increase that public engagement and support that can be related to the legislators or the funding needs of the city for the watershed. And that's something I think we need to start stepping outside of our typical work zones and finding those opportunities. They're not always easy, but when you have that, you can tend to move forward a lot quicker once they become public, instead of having a meeting in the fall where there was tons of opposition and people frothing, and you know. So yeah, I can't overestimate the importance of that public participation.
Thanks for saying that, and actually that brings up one of the reasons that the coalition wanted to put this trip together as sort of a test run with, you know, the folks who know the most first, but to see how the logistics works of kind of this flow of field trip, to try to open it up to the public and, you know, maybe have it be a little bit less technical and wonky, but to get folks out and seeing these treatment areas and how they can be beneficial. So hopefully we'll be able to do that in future years and open it to the public. Yeah. So thank you for your help in test running it. And thank you to Maya for all the organization. I would say that it test ran smoothly. Yeah.
Yeah, as our timekeeper, I'd say probably time to head back. But thanks everyone again for coming.